You're listening to the Lifestyle You podcast, where we help you achieve a realistic and human approach to health and fitness by working with your body, not against it. My name is Jenna Altman, and my mission is to help you, the active woman, find a healthy lifestyle that you can consistently show up for and make decisions that align with you and your body. Today's episode, we will be addressing why you shouldn't try this on your own, why you should ask for help, and how that will actually help you get moving along in the right direction. Asking for help, listening to your body, realizing that health and fitness is more than just weight loss or chasing aesthetics are some of the topics that we're going to cover today. Today's guest, Joelle Samantha, who is the CEO of Level 10 Coaching, co-owner of Fit Coach Pro, and proud mama to her little girl, Sloan. Joelle has a master's degree in exercise physiology, and she's also a former high school health and PE teacher. Her company, Level 10 Coaching, really focuses on the holistic picture of health and wellness. And Joelle is here to share her story today of how her health and fitness journey has evolved over time and come full circle despite the misinformation, the struggles, and challenges that she faced. So that way you don't have to make the same mistakes. Now, I already know what you're thinking. You believe that you can do this all on your own. Maybe you think you just need more discipline. But you actually might be surprised to realize that you might be the one getting in your own way because you're not asking for help. Tune in for this week's episode to learn how you can ask for help and what that will allow you to unlock and uncover in your own health and fitness journey. We are here with Joelle Samantha. She is the CEO of Level 10 Coaching, and we're going to explore all things health and fitness. I'm so excited to jump right into the good stuff. So to begin, Joelle, can you please fill us in on how and why you originally got into this space in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, Jenna, thank you for having me. It's nice to meet quote unquote, everyone over at Lifestyle You. So I am Joelle. I have been in the coaching space itself for about 10 years now. I originally got involved in the coaching space and the coaching industry due to my own health and fitness journey, as probably most coaches do. And I was an athlete growing up. I ran cross country. I was a gymnast. I played lacrosse. And I ate like a high schooler. I ate like an idiot, I had no regard for my nutrition at all, but I did grow up in a fairly healthy household. My dad did bodybuilding. My parents were both gym goers. I was the kid like in gym daycare while my parents went and worked out. So I did have that kind of on my side, but then I went to college and I kept those very same high school eating habits, but stopped being an athlete and stopped running cross country and stopped playing lacrosse and being a gymnast. And lo and behold, caloric intake began to exceed expenditure. And I put on about 30 pounds my freshman year of college. And so that was really what sparked what became my fitness journey, which went to the next extreme. So it was, I gained this weight. I'm going to try to lose this weight. What can I do to lose this weight? And I'm sure we'll dive a little bit more into this just in regards to misinformation, but I kind of just swung to the opposite end of the pendulum here, the spectrum. And I lost that weight and then some, and then kind of began to go down a really disordered path with orthorexia, which is kind of this obsession with clean eating and over exercising, and spent a few years dealing with that until there was a coach that I began working with. And I started being coached by this person who introduced me to macros. And that was a game changer for me in terms of my relationship with food. So we could totally dive into that too. But eventually I was like, oh my gosh, this person really helped me, really helped transform my relationship with food and exercise. And I want to be able to do that for other people. So I continued to go to school. I happened to be in school for education. I was teaching health and PE. Those were my bachelor's degrees at the time. When I finished that, I said, hey, I took one undergrad exercise science class for my health and PE major. And like all the health and PE majors were failing this exercise science class and their anatomy classes. And I was like A's in those classes. I loved it. I was like so fascinated by the human body. And I was like, I need to learn everything there is to know about this. And so I ended up staying in school and doing my master's then in exercise physiology and began coaching on the side. And so that was Joelle Samantha Fitness at the time. And I was just a one-man show and coaching through college, and then got a teaching job and was still coaching on the side of teaching. And a few years later, long story short, left teaching, took coaching full time. And here we are, a team of 10 now. So it's been a wild ride.
It's amazing. I've loved the evolution of your journey. journey. I didn't actually tap into your story and your journey until probably about 2019. So you were still like on the cusp of like level 10 and starting to build your business outside of just you.
Yeah. And also like peak health issues when you started following, probably. Yeah.
I remember very vividly a post, and we can dive into this, but there was a post that you had around your struggles with your gut health, the PCOS, and you sharing something like, I felt really uncomfortable in my skin. It's been hard to show up here. Yeah. And it was just, I don't know why, but that's like the first post that I remember from you, because that's when I entered your story. It was like around that time. Yeah. And it's been cool because now like I can see, I've seen you progress in the other ways, but also like, you know, you still share parts of journey. And now I can, it's almost like I came in the middle, and now I put everything
piece
together.
It all together. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll fill in any gaps that you have in this podcast today for sure.
I love it. So definitely something that you've touched on, and I think is very common for a lot of women who are listening to this podcast, is this immense misinformation. And that's how you shared it on your website, in the health and fitness industry. And so I'm curious, like, which one of those myths were really things that you worshiped and followed and led you to this like massive, probably weight loss, and then orthorexia and all the things that kind of followed after that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, funny enough, you know, Instagram now is so much different than it used to be. And so, you know, we have a lot more information now than I think we used to. And so just to kind of give people a little bit of a timeline, mostly my eating disorder years were through college, after that freshman year, pretty much through the rest of college. And so, you know, this is 2011, 2012 to give people some frame of reference. So like I had just gotten my first iPhone, I think in 2012. You could only have Instagram if you had an iPhone. People still had like Blackberries, and other phones existed besides iPhone, and, you know, a few Samsungs or something, Galaxies here and there. So Instagram was newer, and there was starting to be like a fitness community sort of on Instagram, but it was still very small and very, the grind never stops, kind of Instagram. And so shockingly, Pinterest is really where I was finding a lot of my quote unquote information at the time. Like, you know, I'd be like pinning these girls with abs and like pinning these ab workouts and pinning these shredded women that I wanted to look like. And in my head, if I wanted to look like a yoked bodybuilder, I was just going to have to be dieting all the time. And so my intention was never to like get as skinny as possible. I would see these like ripped bodybuilders and be like, I want to look like that. But there was such a disconnect between needing to eat to build muscle. I just thought like, I need to be dieting and I need to be working out hard. I need to be dieting and I need to be working out hard. And that's how I'm going to look like this person with 80 more pounds of muscle than me. And so that was part of it. You know, part of it was just like naive 19-year-old girl, like Googling how to get abs for summer and reading like no carbs, no fat, no sugar, no salt. Fruit has too much sugar. Eggs have too much fat, too much cholesterol. And so it started with me buying like some random book that was about, I wish I could find even like the name. If I dig hard enough, I could probably find the name of it. And there was nothing wrong with this book. I was someone that read everything as like gospel word when I was learning about health and fitness. There was no like deciphering if something was a credible source or a reliable source of information. It was just like, oh, there's a book on this, so it must be true. Now, as you can imagine, there's lots of bad books and bad articles and things like that all over the internet and wherever else, on information that is not very reliable or factual. And so I believed everything. And soon enough, the good food and bad food list in my head, nearly everything became on the bad food list. Like it started as, you know, limiting my carbohydrates and then sugar was a hard no. And then carbohydrates were a no. And then fruit was a no. And then fats were a no. And so there got to a point where I was pretty much afraid of everything except protein, and was almost exclusively only eating protein. And I vividly remember, and if you've ever heard me on a podcast before, you've probably heard me mention this because I use it as an example all the time, just because it's something that is so vivid in my memory. But I vividly remember eating baby carrots in my dorm room and then doing jumping jacks and running in place and crunches on my dorm room floor to burn off the baby carrots I ate because they had too many carbs and too much sugar because they were carrots. And so that's a prime example of like just how misinformed and how dark of a path I had kind of gone down. And so, yeah, it was all of it. You know, you're asking which things got me. It was all of it. It was the food fear. It was really, really the food fear that continued to perpetuate my clean eating obsession. Like I wouldn't eat a vegetable because it had too many carbs. So like how clean was my diet actually? You know, it really became almost exclusively protein and lots of exercise. You know, I'd go to the gym before class, before my 8 a.m. I'd go work out. I'd go back to the gym if I had a break at noon. And then I'd do some cardio, and then I'd go walk the kind of boardwalk alongside that river every night. And that was probably like a 2-3 mile walk. So it was just constant punishment for eating, and then reward for exercise. Like the only time that I would allow myself to eat like a meal would be after I worked out. And if I didn't work out, God forbid you like ate it all.
Yep. No, all of the things that you shared there, I think are extremely relatable.
Yeah.
To so many of us women. And one thing that I feel like I've seen you talk about this before, was college an enjoyable experience for you?
No.
Okay. Me neither.
And my first year, I feel like I was a relatively quote unquote normal college student. I went out, I had my fun. I was really close with my roommate. We got along very well. We went on spring break together. We had, you know, a fairly big friend group. We had a lot of different friend groups, and we went out, we had our fun, thus part of the 30-pound weight gain. And then I went home for summer. And when I came and I started, you know, losing weight that summer, and when I got back to school, things like weren't the same with my roommate. I don't know if you had an experience like this, where probably some of it was related to like what I was going through, but we like got back to school and almost like had different friend groups, and we like weren't getting along the same way. And I think that was like a piece of my stress too when I was in college. And we ended up like moving out of each other's rooms. Like she ended up moving in with another friend. Some other person got moved into my room, which I like did not get along with her at all. And then I ended up moving into a single room. And I swear that was like the demise of my college experience. Like I at the time wanted it. I was like, I would rather be by myself than have like a roommate I don't want to be with. And so I moved into this single room, and then I could do whatever I wanted and all the freaking sit-ups on my floor I wanted, and not eat, and no one would bother me about it, or no one would tell me to get out of bed and go eat. Like being by myself was like, good. Now I have no one judging me for my fitness and nutrition. And so, yeah, the rest of, I finished out that sophomore year, and then I actually transferred back home to Long Island, and I ended up going to Adelphi. Nice. So then I was commuting from home because I was like, why am I paying all this money to be at school for like, I don't like the people. I'm not socializing. I don't drink. Like I just, and side note, my now husband, who was my boyfriend through college, he was home because he was 3 years ahead of me. So he was home. My parents were home, and I was like, I'm still at school, miserable. And so I ended up transferring home, and that was a lot better for me, but it was not an instant fix to the eating disorder either.
Yeah. It's really interesting because this is like realizations I've had in my own journey, is how, and I didn't realize it until I've been working through this in therapy and realizing, oh, wow, I actually was like really upset and anxious and like struggling in college, and like extremely similar situation to yours, right? Of like struggling to make friends. I didn't play sports at school, and that's how I always had friends. So I didn't know how to really make friends other than that. And then I wasn't a big drinker. I wasn't a big partier. I went to Penn State, which was a huge party school.
I was like a half an hour from you. I was at Lock Haven.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And then we
would go to Penn State to party in my freshman year.
Yes. And then
Yeah.
you're also in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, which
Mhm.
is like, that's a
Literally, like the closest thing to civilization was a Walmart. And if you're from New York like us, you're like, what? Who are these people?
Exactly. Exactly. But the depths of like the struggle that I had was around my environment and my situation.
Mhm.
Right? And so that's why I brought that up. I just made the connection. I was like, I think she didn't enjoy college either.
Yeah, no, it was not. And even when I came home, I don't know if you had a similar experience with this or anyone else who's listening who's maybe struggled with an eating disorder in the past. I have like chunks of my memory just gone because
Yeah.
when you are like knee deep in an eating disorder like that, you are not present in your life because you are truly only present in your own head. And so all of my thoughts were consumed by body image, food, my next meal, if I was going to eat, what I was going to eat, when I was going to exercise, how much I was going to exercise that day, that there are like pieces of my brain that I feel like are just missing from that time of my life because I was so not present. I was just in my own head all the time.
Yeah. And the only like true memories you have are the ones where you're eating baby carrots and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
going into your jumping jacks.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So it's hard. Like people will ask me about like certain things that happened during that time period. And even my husband, cause he was luckily stuck through my side through it all. But, he'll reference things from like 2011, 12, 13. And I'm like, I don't recall that at all. And he'll be like, yeah, those were your crazy years.
Oh, I know.
I'm sorry. Thanks for not leaving me.
That's special. I mean, I'm sure your parents were there and it was really good to move home and to have that support.
It was.
And I wonder too, like based on that, was there like actually a moment that you had where you were like, okay, this is unhealthy. What I'm doing is a little crazy, for lack of a better term, but
yeah. When I was living home, there was definitely a lot of judgment from my boyfriend, from my mom, from my dad. Like, you're not eating enough. You're getting too skinny. And you don't hear it. You don't hear it at all from your loved ones. You're like, yeah, whatever. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm the one with the six pack. You don't have a six pack. So which of the two of us knows what they're doing? Like you're so cocky about it. And like I said, my goal was never to be like skinny. It was to be this like bodybuilder, shredded bodybuilder. So I'm lean as heck, but I had like an 8-pack and I'm like, you're telling me what I should be eating? Okay, dad. It was hard to listen to anyone, but I do remember this one thing that stood out to me. It was my birthday one year. I don't remember what year it was. It had to be, 2012 or 13, maybe even 14, but it had to be 2012 or 13 if I had to guess. And my mom every year made birthday cakes for my brother and I. Like birthdays were a big thing in my house. We celebrated birthdays hard, like sang birthday hats, like birthdays, big deal in my house. And so my mom always made a birthday cake. It was me, my brother, my dad always made a homemade birthday cake. And she made my birthday cake one year and she cut me my slice of cake and I wouldn't eat it. To me, it wasn't a big deal. I was like, you should have known better. I don't eat cake. I don't eat sugar. I don't eat carbs or fats. Like, what are you like? I was so like, did not feel bad. Like, I wouldn't eat this. I don't even know why you bothered making it. And she just looked at me and she was like, you're not going to eat the birthday cake I made you? And I was like, no. And she started crying. And I was like, oh. And that was the first time that I really had a moment of, oh, this is not just affecting me. This is affecting my family. And it was the first time that I was like, am I being too rigid? Like my mom is crying. I heard her feelings that bad. And so that was a really big realization for me. And I don't know that it changed anything in the moment. I certainly didn't wake up the next day and was like, okay, time to be done with this. Like time to not have an eating disorder anymore. Like it was not like that, but it's definitely a moment that stands out to me of some kind of light bulb went off in my head there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so challenging. I mean, your mom now, like imagine.
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah.
Oh, the impact and just
I'm sure she was just heartbroken.
And I'm sure she had already picked up on some things and was like skeptical, but was probably like, that couldn't be. My Joelle wouldn't do that. Like she's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I
But
think it was, I don't think it was about the cake.
oh
I
yeah.
don't think she was sad because I didn't have the cake. I think she was sad because she realized how far gone I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like how far out of reality I was. Not to say anyone listening that you can't turn down cake, but it was such a significant thing to my mom.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
At the
Especially
time.
something and the reasoning behind why you weren't eating it, right? And her
Yeah.
assumption around that, which was accurate, but at the time you thought it was just,
Yeah.
I don't need
I
this.
thought it's just, I'm disciplined.
Yeah.
I have great willpower.
Yep.
That's what
Yep.
it was to me.
Famous quote.
I'm not tempted by your cake, like because it was just part of it was just such an ego thing.
Yep. Did you have, so you shared that your parents, your boyfriend were all like kind of concerned around your body image.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any people who were like cheering you on? Like, oh, Joelle, you look amazing. You're so disciplined. You have so much willpower. Like
Yeah.
any of that?
Anyone who wasn't my family.
Yeah. Because they
anyone
didn't
who
see.
just anyone who
Yeah.
didn't live with me and didn't see my eating habits and my gym habits. And at that time, by then I did have a little bit of an Instagram following in the fitness community. And so I'd be like posting these shredded ab pictures and people are like, oh my God, already the comments like, what's your ab workout? What are you eating? Like, what's your
Mhm.
diet to look like that? And so I don't know if you saw my reel the other day of like things people have said to me while I had an eating disorder.
That was
Oh
my
my
favorite.
gosh. And people didn't know. So there was even a girl that commented and was like, yeah, but did they know you had an eating disorder? And I'm like, no, but that's the point. Like, you don't know, like when you're complimenting someone's weight loss or you're complimenting them for, being shredded or looking the way they do, like, do you know the whole story? Because I was getting a lot of positive reinforcement, a lot of, wow, oh my God, shredded abs. Wow, you're so lean. That's amazing. Wow, you must have crazy discipline. And so that is feeding it for
Oh,
sure.
it's
Yeah.
like lighting the fire for
Yeah.
sure. And you're
And
just
then you
like,
have all these people, like maybe at the time I had around 10,000 followers or so. Instagram was so different then. You literally could like post a picture of an apple and get like 3,000 followers. It was insane. But but I remember, feeling like there are all these people who are like giving me kudos for how I look. And like you three at home, you guys just don't support me.
yeah,
When it was like
absolutely.
totally the exact opposite. Like here are these strangers cheering me on while my family's like pleading with me to like, eat a banana.
Oh, yeah. It's so
Yeah.
interesting how and people on the outside, right? They don't understand what sacrifices you are making and how this is actually affecting you. And it's like, I remember people saying to me, because my whole thing was in college as well. And it was like, oh, Jenna, you look amazing. Like, can I come to the gym
Mm,
with you? Or like, what are you
yes.
doing? And I was like, I run 6 miles every day. I was like very proud of myself
Mhm.
for these activities.
Yep.
And really
Same.
I was like just running away I experienced a bad heartbreak the year between the summer between my freshman and sophomore year. And that kind of like fueled that sort of
Yep.
outlet for me. And then it was just like so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super interesting that you mentioned that too, of like going through something in your life. I always like to give a little bit of context when I talk about this eating disorder situation too, because eating disorders, one, are a mental illness through and through. But for a lot of people, and you just gave a perfect example, for a lot of people, they're very much control related.
Mhm.
And I didn't see it at the time. And now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, you just needed control over something. But here I was going back for my second year of college without my, my now boyfriend, now husband, but who was now home back in New York. And I'm going to school back in PA. I couldn't control that. My dad had cancer, just had cancer surgery, and I had to leave and go back to school. And my dad's home with cancer. My boyfriend is home. My mom's home taking care of my dad. I was double majoring in college. And so I was at max credits, like stressed beyond belief, couldn't control that, couldn't control how much work I was getting, couldn't control how much homework I had, couldn't control that I was in a fight with my roommate, couldn't control that I got this new awful roommate who I hated. Like there were so many things happening in my life that I had no control over. And I can see now that I also had a body composition goal at that time, and combined with that lack of control in my life, it was like I just clung onto,
Mhm.
well, I could control my food and I could control my exercise. And if I can't control anything else in my life, I still had control over those two things. I had control over how I looked. I had control over my food, my nutrition, my exercise, how active I was. And so looking back, it was such a control thing for me. And I still see it now. Like, I'm sure you feel like, you're through your eating disorder, right? Like, I'm completely on the other side of it, but I know when I am stressed, there are control tendencies that I get, and I see it and I can call them out now. Cause I'm like, you're doing it again. You're doing it again. You're trying to be controlling because you're stressed and things feel out of control. And so now you're trying to find what you can control. And so it's interesting to like be conscious of it now, but certainly I didn't know it then.
Yeah. It's so interesting. You're right. And that control thing is just, I mean, we want control in any area of our life. And so wherever we can cling on to it, and especially if everything else is out of control, which can be a positive thing in other senses, right?
Yes.
Like, you can be in control of your health and fitness when life is array in a healthy way, because we talk about that. I talk about that with clients. Like, actually, yeah, you do have more control over this than you realize, but not from a, let's be psycho crazy about it. Let's just like cling to things that are going to be beneficial for us without going overboard and them controlling our lives.
Yeah.
Okay. So share with us when you started getting support, help, like, what did that kind of look like? Was it, I know you mentioned a coach and stuff like that.
So funny enough, there was this random coach that found me on Instagram, and reached out to me. He started following my stuff. He had a pretty decent following as well. And he reached out to me to say, hey, would you like to be a sponsored athlete for my coaching company? Now, this is like a decade ago, like sponsorships, collabs, like they weren't even a thing. Like social media marketing was not even a thing yet. So here I was, like, looked up to this person in the industry. They had a big following. They were a coach. They had all these transformations all over their page. And he was like, I'd love to coach you for free, and you like represent my coaching company. And I thought this was like the greatest thing in the world. I'm like, heck yeah, let's do it. Ba, ba, ba. And so here I go from like really disordered, and he starts talking to me about macros and calories. And I was, through that whole ED, I was never counting calories. I didn't know what the heck a macro was. Like, I just had these good food and bad food lists in my mind, that made no sense at all, mind you. And he opened up my eyes to macros and calories. And he'd be like, yeah, if you fit a Pop-Tart into, your calories for the day, you can't gain weight. Like, it's physiologically impossible. And I'm like, what? I haven't eaten a banana in 3 years, and you're telling me I could eat a Pop-Tart, ice cream, cheesecake, and not get fat? Like, it was mind blowing to me. And so I was like, all right, this guy thinks he knows what he's talking about. Let's do it. And so I'm like eating Pop-Tarts every day. So right then the pendulum swings again, and you're like, okay, go in the complete opposite extreme, where now you're like Pop-Tarts, ice cream, this, that cereal, blah, blah, blah. And he was right. Nothing happened. The world didn't end. And so I know for a lot of people, macro tracking can feel disordered, but for me, I swear, like, macro tracking saved my life, because it completely changed the way I viewed food, because I had such a greater understanding of the fact that a type of macro could not make me gain weight. And so that was really, really exponentially mind-blowing to me. And like I said, completely changed my relationship with food. And so anyway, I was coached by him for a little while. And then I ended up working for his coaching company a little bit. And long story short, once I was working for the business and seeing how things were done, I was like, oh, I don't like this. I don't agree with that. That's not how I would do it. And I ended up leaving that coaching company and starting what became Joelle Samantha Fitness, because I was like, people are putting their trust in us. I don't like the things that are like happening behind closed doors. And so I ended up leaving and starting my own coaching company. And there were a few clients that followed me over from that company. And I just, continued to post my journey on Instagram and my workouts on Instagram, and ended up coaching clients, and continued to stay in school and then do my master's in XPhys, while also, dealing with my own recovery, which there was never like I went to like eating disorder rehab. It wasn't that kind of recovery. It was very much like I worked with him. He changed my idea of weight gain and weight loss. And that completely sent me on like a, research rampage and like exploration rampage and finding other people in the industry who knew about macros. And, at the time, again, this is like 9-10 years ago, no one's talking about reverse dieting.
Mm-hmm.
No one's talking about maintenance phases. So, I dieted, and then I thought the way to stay skinny was to stay dieting. I didn't know that there was maintenance or there was reverse dieting. No one talked about those things yet. So when he had talked to me about reverse dieting, again, I went on this rampage of like, who else is talking about this? There's got to, if this is a thing, there has to be other people that know about it. It can't just be this one guy that I worked with. And so that, continued to make me learn, more about nutrition and fitness and different dieting phases and maintenance phases and bulking phases and blah, blah, blah. And so my recovery was very self-taught almost. Like once I had the idea of macros and whatnot, it was the education that helped me recover, because I could remove the emotion from it and start to look at it more logically, because now I had the background knowledge to make sense of calories and macros. So it was like the more educated I became, the more healed and recovered from my eating disorder, because I had the knowledge instead of the emotions guiding me.
Yeah. And it's something that's coming to mind here with just this conversation is awareness too, right? Like that awareness, that level of like, okay, I am now aware, or I have the knowledge to be able to do these things. And for me too, it was macros. I actually worked with Casey Joe, and she was my first coach in 2018. And that was the first time I had ever heard of reverse dieting, but I was desperately in need of one, because very similar, I was dieting and didn't know, I had the good versus bad foods. But I think what's really interesting about it, and not to pull it onto my side of the journey, but I think it's relevant, is like, I had never been diagnosed with a form of eating disorder, but I knew that I just classified them as disordered eating habits, right? Because I was never like, I don't even know how the diagnosis process works. Like you work with a therapist, I guess they say something to you.
Right.
Like, and so it's funny because I'm like, I went through all of these similar things, and I would say my healing as well is honestly, there's still some healing. There's still a lot of like damage that I've never visited until more recently in therapy. And I'm like, oh, and it doesn't affect me on like the food and nutrition and exercise side of things. It affects me more so on like who I am as a person and like where some of these tendencies came from.
Yeah.
And that's just like so interesting. And I feel like I'm diving into this, years down the road. And I'm like, oh, wow. I had my bad foods list, which was growing more than anything.
Yeah.
And I was what friends would call healthy, and so this is always an important part I'd like to point out in my journey. I actually worked with a nutritionist first in college. And when I went to the nutritionist, she was like, you already know like what foods are good and what are bad, and like did reinforce that idea. But she said, I think you need to work with a therapist. And I almost feel like she was like, this girl has a problem. And like, that was that. But it was the very end of college. I saw the woman for like 4 sessions, and like, anyway. So.
Yeah. I think there was a part of me too that like, I never, again, at the time, I never would have been like, yeah, I have an eating disorder.
Yep.
Like in hindsight, 100%.
Yep.
Hindsight, I could definitely say I was orthorexic. Absolutely. Which is essentially this, subtype of anorexia where you're eating, but it's like very limited, exercise obsessed, clean eating, etc. But the other part of it that I think is kind of an important detail is my dad is a therapist. So that was the other thing, is like my dad knew, like he saw it from the get-go and was like, knew 100%, and he'd call it out, and he'd, say how disordered it was and that this is an eating disorder. And I'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm eating. So I just ate a can of tuna. So clearly I'm not anorexic, that
clearly I'm
clearly. Yeah. So kind of same thing, Jenna, where, at the time it was not like, okay, let's get in therapy. Let's actively try to recover from this eating disorder. It's like years later, you're like, oh, wow, I was very far gone. Yeah. And it was really just kind of the continuing to learn and become educated. And I think what's really, really hard for a lot of people is being objective about their health and fitness and trying to remove the emotional aspect of it and look at things objectively, which can be really, really hard. And somehow along the way, it's hard to even like tell someone how I did that, but somewhere along the way, I was able to become more objective about my body. The more I learned, the more I was able to like remove the emotion and like make logical, educational decisions about my fitness, my nutrition, et cetera. But that's a really hard to do. It's really hard to remain objective. It's, the scale is a great example in and of itself, right? We have clients, let's say, do their weigh-ins every day. And when clients first hear that, they're like, no way, I can't weigh every day. It will get in my head. I'll want to throw the scale out the window. But I'm like, yeah, but it's also going to teach you how to have power over the scale, because you're going to see that daily fluctuations are normal, and you're going to be able to gather objective data over, look, on the night I got 3 hours of sleep, my weight was up 2 pounds the next day. Well, I didn't go on a midnight binge, but clearly when I don't get enough sleep, that affects my weight fluctuations. That affects my water retention. And so, one of the things that I just recommend in terms of like objective data and trying to be objective about your body is those daily weigh-ins, because you're seeing how normal daily fluctuations are. And it does not mean, those fluctuations do not mean that you're not following your nutrition or your exercise protocols. They're just normal fluctuations. And so at first, right, when you first start stepping on the scale, you're like, oh my gosh, scale's up 2 pounds. I'm doing an extra hour of cardio today, and I'm slashing my carbs today. That is the exact opposite of being objective. It's like pure emotional decision based on the scale. Whereas if you could step back, be objective, and you're like, oh, I didn't sleep well, or I'm extremely stressed, or I hit a heavy leg day yesterday and I still hit all of my macros, but I'm really sore today. I must be holding a little bit of extra water from my workout yesterday. Like, it's the ability to see your body, yourself, and your journey objectively that is so, so, so important in making progress without emotional decisions getting tied into it.
Yeah. And I think you touched on how challenging that really is. And I think that's partially because your physical and mental health are so interrelated, intertwined, and it's hard to separate. It's literally very challenging because they're almost naturally combined.
Yes.
One influences the other and vice versa. So at the Lifestyle You podcast, we really preach like, hey, we want to help you discover that your health and fitness is more than just weight loss by helping you work with your body, not against it. And I think that evolution is something that comes over time. And I'm curious eventually how your, journey went from, I want to be a bodybuilder, a ripped, shredded bodybuilder, to I want to get my body prepared for pregnancy. I want to take care of my health. I want to be able to breastfeed my amazing daughter and, all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So the missing chunk here in this story, from eating disorder to now being a mom and having a 10-month-old, is that eventually my body just completely, for lack of a better phrase, got sick of my shit. And so I had gone off birth control in like 2018 and in preparation for pregnancy, not immediately. Like I was like, hey, I've heard, it could take a few months to like get your period back. So I'm going to go off of birth control, which I had been on for 10 years. And, that way, if it takes a few months, we were thinking we'd try to get pregnant like a year from then. So I was like, cool, I'll go off like a year in advance. We'll have plenty of time. And at this time, I really did not know anything about birth control, anything about women's health specifically, anything about menstrual cycles, periods, pregnancy. I knew nothing. I just knew like, hey, I've heard it could take a few months to like get your period regular. So I'll go off in advance. Well, I went off. 3 months go by, no period. 6 months go by, no period. And I'm like gaining weight and like hadn't changed anything about my macros. Nothing was different. Like my gym schedule was the same. My macros were the same because I was still tracking at the time. And I just start like putting on weight. So I hire a coach. Coach is seeing the same thing, like putting on weight. I go to the OB. I'm like, hey, gaining all this weight, haven't gotten a period. They take blood work. They're like, everything's normal. Just give it a little bit more time. 3 months later, still no period. Everything's normal. Give it a bit more time. So now I'm like, months and months into this, 6 months, 9 months. And every time someone is like, there's nothing wrong. You're fine. Just wait. I'm finding a new OB because I'm like, they don't know what they're talking about. So then I'm finding a new OB. So now I'm like going through like 5 OB-GYNs in 1 year to be like, what is happening? Why am I gaining all this weight? I feel awful. I'm puffy. I'm watery. I'm stressed. I can't stop gaining weight. I'm like up at this pound, like at this point, like 15, 20 pounds. And on my small frame at the time, that was a lot for me. I'm 5'3", and, was probably around 115, 120-ish, somewhere between there. And so then to be up at like 125, 135 was like, whoa, like my leggings are starting to not fit. And I'm not saying like 125, 135 is big, but when you're small and you have never weighed that much and you're up 20 pounds and you cannot pinpoint, what's gone wrong here. And I remember like going to OBGYNs and they're like, oh, you want to get your period back? Okay, just go back on birth control. And I'm like, wait, I don't know a lot at the time, but I know that that's not how this works. And I know if I want to get pregnant, that kind of defeats the purpose of me having gone off birth control. And so luckily I had a friend at the time, Alessandra, who you may know, who was like trying to get pregnant around that time. And so she had shared something on her Instagram about like the period repair manual, maybe was the initial book. And so she was like, try this book, like see if you could learn anything from there. And then I, found like Jolene Brighton and the Beyond the Pill book and all of that like then spewed my major interest into women's health. And eventually I went to another OB and she gave me a PCOS diagnosis. And I was like, okay, so great. We have a diagnosis. What do we do? And she was like, well, the treatment for PCOS is birth control. And I'm like, this is like, I just felt like I was going around in circles. And at this point I was like so uncomfortable. I was for the first time dealing with depression, anxiety, and like, those were never things that I had struggled with before. My gut was a mess. My hormones were a mess. I'm up to a year and a half post pill, still no period. Now I'm up like 30, 35 pounds. My coach can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. And at the same time, this is when I was leaving teaching to take my coaching business full time. And so now I'm dealing with this like imposter syndrome of who's going to hire me, who's going to want me to be their coach when I'm up 30 pounds. I can't figure out my own health. My hormones are a mess. No one's helping me. My doctors can't figure it out. Like, where else am I supposed to turn? Sam Miller was amazing in that process for me. I'm like, okay, I got this PCOS diagnosis and he had become a friend of mine like a few months prior. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. Like, tell me what I need to know. And he was talking to me about, well, PCOS is stress driven, And I'm like, I'm not stressed. And he's like, you get up at 4 a.m. to go work out at the gym at 5 a.m., fasted before your 9-hour long school day. And then you come home from teaching and you're grading, lesson planning, and doing client programming. And then all of your client check-ins are on weekends and you have no weekend because you're purely doing grading, lesson planning, and client check-ins on weekends. And then you're in bed by 9 o'clock to get up at 4 a.m. to do it again the next day. You're not stressed. And I'm like, well, when you put it like that. And so he was really the first person that was like, you need to drastically reduce the stress in your life. That means eating more. That means sleeping more. That means lowering your workout intensity. So I did, blood testing and Dutch tests. And eventually I found Taylor. Taylor Sappington. She's Tailored Wellbeing on Instagram. She's an integrative health practitioner. And I was following someone at the time that was working with her on her gut health. And I knew nothing of gut health. And here I was like really starting to understand hormones and hormone health now, but I knew nothing about the gut. And so I messaged this Taylor lady because I see she's helping someone with their gut. And I'm looking at her Instagram and I'm like, all right, she looks like she knows some things about this. And I messaged her and I'm like, hey, I saw you're helping Sarah with her gut. I don't have any gut issues, but I'm missing a period for a really long time. And I definitely have some hormone issues. Do you think you could help me with that? And she was like, oh, honey, like the gut and hormones are one and the same, essentially. Like they're very intertwined. Typically when there's issues with one, there's issues with the other. And so long story short, I started working with her. We did all sorts of gut protocols and certain supplements based on, my personal lab work. And I worked with her for a few months, and a few months after that, my first period came back. And so I know this is a very long-winded response to, your question about working with your body instead of against it. And there was just for so long that I was fighting against my body, like trying to out diet these hormone issues and trying to out exercise exercise this weight gain and out exercise my stress and out diet, my body image issues. And so much of that was just fighting against my body instead of just listening to what it needed, the rest that it needed. And soon enough, after 18 months and 30 plus pounds, my first cycle came back and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the work I have been doing. This is exactly like what was supposed to happen. And it was really cool to kind of like prove to myself that like I was able to do this on my own, with help from coaches and practitioners and whatnot. But I remember like the OB being like, well, you either need to go on birth control or you need hormone replacement, but like, you'll never get pregnant on your own. You'll never get your periods back on your own. So it was a big, like, yeah, like, okay, like I did this. You said I couldn't, and I did. And so eventually my cycles became more regular, and I just became so passionate about menstrual health and period health and how important it is to have periods and normal menstrual cycles and so on. And so I wanted to be cycling for about a year before I entertained the idea of pregnancy, because I was so terrified of like, well, what if I got one period back, got pregnant? Like my chances of miscarrying are probably higher. Like my hormones are just getting the hang of it. I haven't had a period since I'm like 17 before I went on birth control, like a true period. And I just felt like the right thing was to be cycling for a few months before I tried to get pregnant. And so my first period came back like March of 2020. Amidst COVID, launched level 10 in April, just to give you some like frame of context here. Got periods that whole year. They eventually got shorter. Like it was like 45 days and 38 days, 30 days. And then it was like 27, 27, 27, okay. 27, yep. 27, 27. Yeah. Like 8 months in a row. And so January of 2021, we were like, okay, new year, let's start trying. We got pregnant that first month.
I love those stories.
Yeah. It was, oh my gosh. It was just, again, another moment of like, oh my gosh, this is everything I've been working toward for like 2 years of being miserable and weight gain and, just having to learn how to cope in other ways and not use exercise as my only coping strategy. And man, I'm so, so grateful for that journey, because I really think it was the final piece of healing entirely from my eating disorder, my relationship with food, my poor body image. Like by the time I got pregnant, I was so happy to be there and to be pregnant and to be carrying a life inside of me. Like, I just remember getting all these questions once I got pregnant, like, how are you dealing with the weight gain? And how are you dealing with your body changing? And I was like, I love it. I'm so excited about it. And I don't think if I had had that initial journey with being forced to gain weight to get my period back, I don't think I would have had the same experience with my changing body during pregnancy. But I was just so grateful for getting to that point and getting pregnant when, doctors were telling me, you can't do it. You'll never be able to. You'll have to come back for fertility treatments and And it was just like, oh, it's sweet, like revenge, but at the same time, like just the most rewarding thing in the world. And so, I very much attribute my very neutral and neutral / positive relationship with food, exercise, in my body now to what happened pre-pregnancy that then set me up for a much better pregnancy and postpartum journey in terms of body image. It was 1.5 to 2 years of learning to just stop fighting.
Yeah.
To just let my body do what it needed and stop fighting it and start listening to it and give it the rest it needed. And I drastically, I stopped doing loads of cardio. I was only walking. I, dropped lifting from 5-6 days a week to 3 days a week, and I really had to learn a lot of other like coping strategies because exercise was the way I coped. And so I had to, change what I was doing. I had to change the way I was exercising. I had to change my nutrition. I changed the water I was drinking, the food I was eating, the amount of food that I was eating, the supplements I was using, the deodorant, the soaps. I changed everything just to, wherever I thought I could bring stress down, and that's the biggest thing here. I think we forget that stress is not just like I'm sitting in traffic or I have a deadline for work. Stress is how you're training, how you're eating, how you're sleeping, how you're coping. And so, yeah, it's amazing to now see it all come kind of full circle and be, postpartum and just have a totally different point of view on pregnancy and body image and the gratitude that came from that really, really, really hard chapter of life.
Yeah. I'm just smiling over here. No one can see this, but it's just like, this story is just so powerful because I know so many women who do struggle with either infertility or just like issues where they feel like birth control isn't helping this. Like I need to like explore other avenues. And it's like the access to those things is like not a thing. Right. Yeah. And we're told like, I similarly lost my period for 2 years. And, it was like, you need to go on birth control. And my mom, thankfully, was very not anti-birth control, but she's just anti like medication in general. And she was like, I don't know, like, what are the long-term effects? Like, does it actually affect your ability to get pregnant in the future? She's like, I don't think we should do that. And I was like, okay. And the doctor was like, if you don't want to do that, then you're going to have to gain. I was 105 pounds at the time.
Yeah.
She said, you're going to have to gain at least 10 pounds. And I was traveling abroad that summer for study abroad in Sevilla, Spain. And I was like,
you're like, I got this.
I was like, ooh. And the fact, this is really sad, Joelle, but the fact that somebody told me that I had to gain weight in order, like, I was like, oh my God, no one's ever told me that. Like, and I was so happy.
It was a compliment.
It was a compliment. And it was also just like someone's giving me permission.
Yeah. The doctor is telling me I have to. So I guess I do.
And I was so happy. And I was like, and so looking back, that's like, oh, weird. Like,
yeah,
strange.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And she was actually, my gynecologist was the first person that she asked my mom to leave. She shut the door and she said, I'm just kind of curious. Have you been struggling with any like disordered eating, or do you think you have a eating disorder? And I was like, no, and just like very dismissive of that concept. But all this to say, like, I have also explored the other avenues and read the books and dove down this just the possibilities that are out there. And it's just so assuring. And I hope that people who are listening to this don't have to feel like they are pigeonholed into like this one scenario. Like there are ways to like really get through to a lot of this stuff, but it does require money, resources, time. I mean, just like it's a whole lifestyle change.
Yeah. That's a great point too, Jenna. I think for so long, I wanted to be able to just do it on my own. Like I could figure this out. And to a degree, I no one can do the work but you. I did the work on my own, but I absolutely had people in my corner, not just my support system, like my husband and my parents, but friends like Sam, friends like Casey, friends like Alessandra, and, and practitioners. Taylor was a huge, huge integral part of my journey, as was Sam. And so having people in your corner to help saved me even more time. Had I tried to do it on my own, it could have taken me another 3 years of research and whatever else, on top of dealing with it all, working with a coach or a practitioner or something like that. Definitely. Yes, it is a resource. Yes, it is a cost. But things, when it comes to your body like that, I really try to look at that stuff like as an investment and not an expense, because there's a return on what you're spending, right? An investment means there's a return on your money. Well, the return is my health. The return is, my periods or my pregnancy or whatever else. And so, there's no shame at all. No shame in asking for help. I think, we're creatures that just love to be able to say, I could do it on my own. I could do it. I shouldn't need help, but sometimes we do. Yep. Sometimes we do, whether that's a coach, whether that's a fitness coach, whether that's a practitioner, whether that's a therapist, we need help sometimes.
Yep. I've learned a lot about that in my 20s of just like ask for help. Like, and now I'm like, who can help me with this?
Yes. Yes. Now you're like, delegate everything. Who can help me? I don't want to do any of it.
I love it. So just one last component that I want to chat about, because I think, I don't know, you could either be a mom, you could just have multiple jobs, you can be like really busy. Everyone always feels like they're extremely busy. And so I'm curious, as someone who is truly extremely busy and has a lot of, responsibilities as a CEO, a mom, a wife, a friend, like all of those things. How do you kind of balance and juggle all of that? And how can we kind of give the listeners some, I don't know, tactical, tangible kind of ways?
Yeah. So I know it's not always in the cards for everyone from a budgeting standpoint. But I do have a lot of help. I have someone that, is here at my house. a family member that is here at my house. A family member that comes 3 days a week, and a good friend of mine comes twice a week, to help with the baby so I can get work done. And I very much, when Sloan was first born, I was like, I don't need help. I could do it all on my own. I could totally run 2 businesses and have a baby. Like, I'm Superwoman. I could do anything. And that's partly true. I am Superwoman, but I couldn't do it all on my own. And I came to that realization, a few weeks into my postpartum journey. I was like, I can't do this by myself. My husband had a month off for paternity. And when he went back to work, I was like, wait, so now what? When am I supposed to work? Like, when am I supposed to get stuff done? And so then I had, an aunt of mine coming 3 days a week, and that worked for a little bit, but it just 3 days a week ended up not being enough. Like, I own Level 10, and I co-own Fit Coach Pro. There's a fitness coaching software company. And it just became like, to try to get all of my work done in 3 days, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like while the baby's home and I'm still nursing, and I'm, upstairs, downstairs, going to see her and go watch her eat, and like go just look at her for a little and then pop back up to my office. Like, it's not free of distraction. Like, she's not in daycare, she's home, which is fantastic. And I love having her home, but it means there's a little bit more distraction involved. And so after a while, I was like, man, 3 days a week is just not enough for me to get all of my work done, split between 2 businesses is just not possible. So now I have Monday through Friday. And once she turns 1, we're going to be sending her to daycare. So come October, she'll be going to daycare, and I haven't stopped crying about it, but I know it will also be absolutely wonderful from like a productivity standpoint. I know it will be great for her, but yeah, I mean, if I had to give a piece of advice, it would be to not be afraid to ask for help. Again, I know not everyone has necessarily financial means for daycare or to have someone be at their house, but even if it's like 1 day a week, even if 1 day a week or twice a week, you have a family member there or a nanny there, or a babysitter there, especially if you are someone that works from home or you have a business. I thought that I could be like full-blown CEO, work from home while also being stay-at-home mom. And they're 2 completely different and full-time jobs. Like, to be a stay-at-home mom is a full-time job. And then to run 2 businesses, also a full-time job. And it's really, 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 really challenging to do 2 full-time jobs. And just every step of the baby's life, like, things change. You like get into a routine, and then a few weeks later, like, she's crawling, and now you're like, oh my gosh, she's on the move. I can't just like set her down now. And then a few weeks later, the nap schedule changes, and a few weeks later, something else changes. So it's kind of one of those, as someone who loves routine and loves schedule and loves structure, you just have to like forfeit any idea of structure and routine postpartum, especially probably in that first year of the baby's life. It's just, you got to give up control. Speaking of control here, you got to just give it up, and do what you can. And, if you're a business owner and you happen to be listening, separating work time and family time is so important to me. Like, if I am up and hanging out with Sloan, I am not on my computer doing emails or filming content. Like, when she is asleep, that is when I will work, whether that's naps or nighttime sleep. I do not like family time to take away from work and work to take away from family time. So for me, it was like, I have to bring someone else in because I want to be all of work Joelle at work and all of mom Joelle with Sloan.
Yep.
So advice, ask for help when you need it. And whether that's mental health help, or, nanny help, babysitter help, but ask for help. Moms, you do not need to do it all alone. Yeah.
I love it. You guys are truly, truly super women. I'm just like, there's so many times where I'm like, I don't even know how it's going to happen. Like, am I going to survive?
You will. You will. You do figure it out. It's hard, but you have good people in your corner. You have a great support system. And when you have that, it makes it a lot easier.
Love it. The tribe. Doesn't it take, what do they say? It takes a tribe.
Takes a village. Yeah. Takes a village. Yeah.
Tribe isn't the right word.
Tribe. Same thing. Yeah. Same thing.
Awesome. Okay. On our episodes, we like to do what's called a food for thought. And this is basically where, if your listeners could have one takeaway from today's episode, what would that be?
I feel like the overarching theme was to like ask for help and recognize that you don't have to do everything on your own by yourself. We're not meant to do things on our own. We're social creatures by nature. And guess what? If I break my arm, I'm not going to try to cast it on my own. I'm going to go to a hospital and get an x-ray and get a cast and everything else. Like, it's so interesting that some things, like we want to do our taxes, we call an accountant. We need to sue somebody, you call a lawyer. Like, we don't presume that we can do those things on our own. But why, when it comes to our health and fitness, are we like, no, I can do it on my own? Yeah. It's okay if it's not your expertise. You have another full-time job doing whatever you do versus hiring someone whose full-time job it is to take care of other people's health and fitness. So take care of you and remember that it is an investment and not an expense.
Love it. Love it, Joelle. Thank you so much for joining us. This was just, oh my God, chock full of amazing things.
Of course.
And I knew it was going to go in many different ways because I was like, I know so much about you that I could have taken it so many different ways. So,
well, anyways. Always happy to come back for a part 2. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you for listening to the Lifestyle You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and review to help others discover the magic we're creating together. If there's someone in your life who could benefit from listening to this episode, be sure to forward it along to them. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jenna Ray Altman for more helpful content, resources, and good vibes. As always, thank you so much for being here.